Hi, this is Kara from the Special Needs Mom podcast.
And this is Angela from Especially Organized, Sensible Solutions for Special Needs Moms.
We have this heart for special needs moms. And so we thought, you know what, let's combine forces. And we have come up with what we're calling the Purge Party. And you can pretty much guess what it is. It's a party where we're going to come together and we're going to purge, or in general, accomplish a goal, a small goal together. So we have set this for January 27th, starting at 8 o'clock for my Pacific Coast people.
Which means 11 o'clock for all of you on the East Coast. So this is an opportunity. If you have something on your to-do list that has just been stuck there and you are wanting to move it up on the list, you're wanting to tackle, maybe it's a space or an area of your home or a category in your home that has just needed a little time and attention. This is your opportunity for you to be online with us while you work and have access for us to help you answer your questions, help guide you, and just serve you for those 2 hours.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you can tell like what we've designed is just this very high level of support for that project that you just haven't been able to tackle on your own. The thing that we are envisioning is that you get to leave this purge party feeling so accomplished because you did the thing. You started the year off getting that thing done that you were stuck on last year. And so it's a momentum builder, if you will. You can go ahead and sign up. We have a link ready for you. And we are offering this for $40 for the whole experience.
Absolutely. And we hope you'll join us. I think it's going to be really fun. It's going to be a great group of moms of special needs kids. So we all get each other. We all have an understanding of what it's like to have something on our to-do list, but just we haven't been able to tackle it yet. So I hope that you will join us. We're super excited to bring this to you, and we are thrilled to work with you.
All right. We'll see you all there. Hi, I'm Kara, life coach, wife, and mom to 4 incredible and unique children. It wasn't all that long ago that my son received a diagnosis that had my world come crashing down. I lacked the ability to see past the circumstances, which felt impossible, and the dreams I once had for my life and family felt destroyed. Fast forward past many years of surviving and not at all thriving, and you'll see a mom who trusts that she can handle anything that comes her way and has access to the power and confidence that once felt so lacking. I created the Special Needs Mom podcast to create connection and community with moms who find themselves feeling trapped and with no one who really understands. My intention is to spark the flare of possibility in your own life and rekindle your ability to dream. This isn't a podcast about your special needs child. This is a podcast about you. If you are a mom who feels anxious, alone, or stuck, then you are in the right place. Welcome. Hello and welcome to the Special Needs Mom podcast. I'm very excited today to have 2 incredible moms part of the conversation that we're having today. I don't know how to totally summarize it. I mean, we're talking about their experience with nursing care. And the reason I chose to bring this topic to the podcast is because it's coming up a lot in coaching. So in my one-on-one coaching sessions, in the different groups that I have, the different Pathway to Peace groups that I have, it's coming up a lot. And I totally get it. There's a lot involved in nursing care. So I've actually split the conversation we had up into 2 podcast episodes. And the first part is leaning a little bit more towards some of that emotional impact, kind of the personal journey, and kind of how it's working now. And the latter half, or the second episode, is going to lean a little bit more towards some of the maybe tips and tricks or things that have worked, or maybe how to manage stuff in your life with nursing care. And so it's very loose, right? Like it's not really black and white. I didn't design it to be very clearly like this part and this part. It's kind of a fluid conversation, but that's generally what you can expect. And the gals introduced themselves pretty thoroughly in the episode, but what I will mention is that there is a previous episode with Carrie Holt. Can't remember the episode number right off the bat. It's a few years ago, but it's a very, very well-loved episode. I think it's called Tending Your Heart with Carrie Holt. And I will put the link to the episode in the show notes so that you can listen to that one. It's definitely worth a listen. And then Kacie has also been part of the podcast before, and she'll share a little bit more about who she is. I'm very glad to have both of these women here on this episode because they exhibit two women that are very experienced, but also always learning. And that's one thing I appreciate about this community here is that I think all of us have not arrived. But yet, it doesn't mean that we haven't had some successes or found some things that work for us. So I'll stop talking. Let's get into the episode. Carrie and Kacie, welcome to the Special Needs Mom podcast.
Thank you for having us.
All right. Well, let's start with a little bit more thorough introductions. Carrie, I'm going to ask you to go first. Tell us a little bit about you as a mom, as a caregiver, as a podcaster, and love to hear a little bit more.
Sure. So I am Carrie. I'm Holt. I'm from Central Ohio, and I co-host the podcast Take Heart Special Moms alongside Sarah and Amy. And we had a book come out in May, which was lovely. And then as far as my journey personally, I've been married to my husband, Bruce, for 23 years. And we have 4 children ranging in ages from 20 to 13. We have 3 sons and a daughter. Our oldest son is a sophomore in college. So our third son, Toby, who is 16, he is our son with a disability, special needs. And we were introduced into that world when I was pregnant. My 20-week ultrasound, we found out he had spina bifida and hydrocephalus. And then when he was 2.5 weeks old, he had something called a Carrie crisis, where he went into respiratory failure. And that is what introduced us into the world of having private duty nursing or home nursing, depending on how you label that. But we spent 2 months in the hospital. He came home with a trach, ventilator, and a feeding tube. And we have had nursing in our home for the last 16 and a half years. It has ebbed and flowed through different stages. I think one time I sat down and tried to make a list of all the nurses who've been in our home, and it's over 40, I believe, at this point. And I know I missed some because, you interview and don't hire, or they show up for 2 days and then they stop showing up. So we know this world of nursing and caregiving quite well.
Yeah, it sounds like it. It's a lot of years of experience. Well, thank you. And Kacie, let's hear a little bit about you and your journey into nursing care as well.
Yeah. So my name is Kacie Craig, and I live in Southwest Missouri. And professionally, I am the executive director for the Acute Syndrome Foundation, which helps support families and patients with the genetic mutation called SCN8A. And so how I was introduced to this world was my youngest daughter. So I guess I should back up a little bit. So I've been married to my husband for almost 16 years. We have a 12-year-old named Lincoln. And then we were introduced to the special needs world with my daughter, Stella. She just turned 8. And my entire pregnancy and the first 6 weeks of her life was ignorance is bliss. We thought everything was perfectly fine and everything was just going to be hunky-dory. And then she decided to have a tonic-clonic seizure at 6 weeks old that was over 8 minutes. And then that kind of turned into this whole cascade of events of us going to our nearest children's hospital, which is 4.5 hours away, doing so many testing and then getting the genetic results back. And at the beginning of that journey, I remember our number one worry was, oh my gosh, what if she's on a seizure medication and she can't drive when she's 16? Oh gosh, how horrible would that be? Okay, we'll just move to Chicago and she can ride the L and be independent. And then within 2.5, 3 weeks, now we're talking about major genetic issues to now will she ever walk? Will she ever talk? Will she live past the age of 2? So this was just this huge paradigm shift. And we were really struggling with obviously that diagnosis. But then she started in with the not sleeping and the screaming and hours and hours and hours. And my husband and I both had to keep our full-time jobs. I was the primary breadwinner. I kept insurance on the kids. We could not lose that. And due to us both being able to work or having to work, we did not qualify for Medicaid in the state of Missouri. So for the first 2 years of Stella's life, we had zero help, zero nursing care. She was up about every 2 hours, screaming her little head off. I would take 3-hour shift, then my husband would take a 3-hour shift, and then we would work a full-time job the next day. We were literally walking around like zombies and were desperate for help. So finally, through the state of Missouri, we were able to get a Medicaid waiver called the Sarah Lopez waiver. That got us A, nursing, and then B, self-directed hours. So we'll talk more about that later, but it really just kind of opened us up to, oh my gosh, we can have some breathing room and have some help in our home.
Isn't it incredible when we look back at these seasons in our life, like for you, when you were, taking 3-hour shifts of sleeping for years, right? And then, I'm sure, Carrie, you have your moments where you have your own audacious story. Likewise for myself. And you look back and you're like, I don't even know how I did that. Let alone people asking me the question, like, I don't know how you do it. You're like, I actually don't know how I did it. So I think it's, incredible to look back. So thank you, both of you, for giving us a quick little snippet, a little window into your lives. And what I want to start with is looking at the evolution of your relationship to nursing care. So this can be both actually, like you mentioned a little bit about how and when it started, but I know, Kasey, you mentioned like it started off a little bit like less frequently and then it grew. So Kasey, why don't you start us off with this journey and this evolution, where you started and even where you are now?
Yeah. So like I said, the first opening of, oh my gosh, we can have some help. We were just wanting like a night or two. We're like, oh gosh, how amazing would it be if we got to sleep for 1 or 2 nights a week? Wouldn't that be wonderful? And then once we got 1 or 2 nights, it was like, gosh, what could we do if we had 3 or 4 nights? And then as we kind of grew our nursing and our self-directed hours, and then we got all 5 nights of the week covered. Then it turned into the weekend and it was like, gosh, this is really nice. And honestly, for the probably first year, we were just trying to make up sleep that we had lost for 2 years. And so it really just started out as survival. Like what kind of help can we get just to survive? And then it kind of turned in and morphed into gosh, what if I had some daytime help? Because at that point in time, I was working like 2 days at home, 3 days away from home. What if on those 2 days I had people that could help with the morning routine with with her and my son, or in the evening so I can cook dinner? Like, gosh, what would that feel like? And so then it just kind of kept growing. And I know we've talked a lot, Kara, so I'll share real quick that I am in the Pathway to Peace program, the coaching program. And we kind of started this unique, I guess, group, if you will. So with the Cute Syndrome Foundation, we were able to set aside some funds and actually support like up to 8 family members to come for the Pathway to Peace. And so they could get that coaching for free. And so we've had a lot of discussions about like building your team and, what could you do or what do you want to do? Do you want to look at professional aspirations? Do you want to just have time to be able to take a nap or go enjoy, life just a little bit, or a lot, depending on your coverage. And so that has really made me think, okay, what kind of support do I need to be able to actually like sit down and take a breath? And it's not just survival, and it's actually like living and thriving and be able to have a career, but also be able to go on vacation or take a nap or, read a book, things like that. So I think that's kind of, we started out as major survival. And then now that I've got these key people, I feel like I'm so well supported that I can do these other things and I can dream about these other things instead of just like that will never happen for me.
I think that's such a good point to mention, the shifts from survival into like actually you dreaming, because a lot of people that are in that survival or even the next stage where they're kind of like sacrificing it all to care for their child, what they miss most is that they miss like having hopes for their life, kind of the things that they always wanted. And even though they know that it might look different, like they don't have anything at all. And what I want to say is it's completely normal if you're in survival state that you don't have those thoughts, that you are not hoping and dreaming, you're surviving. But what I want to point out about that is that there are these distinct stages of evolutions. I talk about it a lot in different episodes of what I call the evolution of a special needs mom, because good news is you're not going to be in survival forever. Like you will change and evolve, and it doesn't mean we won't return to survival at some point. So thank you so much for that, Kacie. And so Carrie, let's turn to you. Why don't you share a little bit about your relationship into nursing? How did it start? How was it then? And how is it now?
Yeah. So our journey is probably a little bit flipped with Casey's in that when we were getting ready, probably a month before we were getting ready to take our son home from the hospital, they weren't going to let us leave without nursing care in our house because my son had a trach, and that's considered an unstable airway, which it was very unstable then. And he was on a ventilator 24/7. He's now just on a ventilator when he sleeps. But those two things automatically qualify you typically through most insurances and state waivers for nursing. And so we were covered 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. It was just finding the nurses. And at the time, I had 3 children, 3 and under. So I had a 2-year-old son.
That gave me the chills.
Oh 3.5-year-old son. And then I'm bringing home this medically fragile child. And I had one moment I remember. So my son was in the hospital 8 days because he had 2 surgeries, a surgery to close the open hole in his back the day he was born, and a surgery to place a shunt 4 days later. So 8 days, he comes home. And I can remember I grew up in Michigan. My parents had my older 2 boys. And the day they brought them home and they left, this was before he ended up with the trach. We were home about 10 days before the second major medical thing happened. And I just remember thinking, okay, I'm nursing 2 to 3 hours. We have to empty his bladder with a catheter every 2 to 3 hours. Those two things don't necessarily coincide. I knew he had reflux. He was doing some projectile vomiting. There were symptoms that things were coming. And then I have these 2 little boys that I'm running to preschool, trying to corral. And again, it's just that thing of like, I don't know how I'm going to do this. I really don't know how. And at that time, we wouldn't have qualified, I don't think, for any nursing care whatsoever. So fast forward, it's just been, at one point, he finally qualified for a Medicaid waiver. And we have a couple nurses that have been with us since he was about a year old. But it just honestly ebbs and flows. We've had nurses with us 15 years. We've had nurses with us a year. And sometimes I just have this love-hate relationship with it because there have been people watching me parent for the last 17 years. I mean, my oldest is 20 and my next son is 18. And they watched me have another baby and navigate that. After Toby, we have a daughter who's 3 years younger than him. And so it's just been, and then there honestly has been a point as Toby has gotten older, he's gotten a little bit more independent, that we're in this kind of strange stage right now where he is starting to have a say. He can talk. He's fully developmentally appropriate for talking for his age for the most part. And now we just had a recent situation where he was personally having boundary issues with a nurse. Now he and I are navigating this together because he still has a ventilator. He still has a trach. And we were also in and out of the hospital for the first 14 years of his life. He had 60 surgeries in those first 15 or so years of his life. So it's just been this ebb and flow of really, really needing so much help. And honestly, I'm so grateful because I think it's helped to keep our marriage healthy and allowed us to get away and allowed us to not feel so guilty about our other kids and them being involved in sports and that kind of stuff. Like that has been wonderful. But at the same time, every time a new nurse walks through my door at this point, I hate starting over. It's a buildup of trust. You're having to interview them and let them into your home. And I've learned some things that I can share later, some tips and tricks. But honestly, just recently, we've lost quite a bit of our nursing again. And the thought of starting over makes me sick to my stomach because I feel like we've given so much of our lives and hearts away to nurses through the years that have had an impact on our lives. And then they just walk out of our lives, right? Because they move on to new jobs, or the situation didn't work out, or whatever that case may be. And there's a part where you just start to get kind of cynical and you're like, I really do not have the mental, emotional, spiritual capacity to start over again. So it's been interesting. I'm kind of in that stage right now, and it's been a little bit difficult. So
yeah, I've talked recently on the podcast about me being personally in a space where I've realized, oh, I'm actually under supported. So I'm taking a look at kind of where I've gotten stuck in that. Turns out, even though I'm a coach, I get stuck too. I think that's important to mention, right? That we all have our areas. And I think there's this piece about support where there's this tension between the effort it takes to get it and the gift of receiving it. So as you're speaking, Carrie, it's like, well, of course, having a nurse is likely beneficial. But like you mentioned, the emotional toll, the personal, all the different relational tolls, like Toby's kind of not maybe loving it. Like, oh my gosh, like there's so much to weigh in all this. So I guess what I would put in here is like, this is just another place. Yet another one is to bring so much compassion to ourselves as we are navigating this and not making ourselves wrong for either having or not having the support that we have. And if we are resistant, not making ourselves wrong for that. Because it's real easy to kind of turn on ourselves and be like, well, what's wrong with you? Like, why aren't you doing this or doing that? And I also want to mention a little bit about just relating to Toby's voicing his preference. And, he's just a little bit older than my son. My son's 14 now. And we were at an event this weekend where I was essentially following him around. He was wheeling around on his own, but I was following him around because why? I knew exactly what he was going to be doing. And it wasn't things I wanted him to be doing. And so he's like getting kind of mad. He's like, Mom, why are you stalking me? And I said, well, Levi, I don't know what I said, but basically there's this tension of like, they need the help, right? Probably, if you're on a ventilator, there's probably a great reason why insurance pays for a nurse. It's necessary. But how do we honor their wishes and desires to grow up as teenagers and also to keep them safe? And I don't have the answer to that. I guess I just want to put it out there as this is what we're working with.
I was just going to jump into that, something that just kind of came to mind. And both of us have, other children. And essentially these people are in their lives too.
Mm-hmm.
And so, they're navigating, my son was 5, I guess, when Stella first started getting nursing care, and he's a little boy, he runs around in his underwear. Well, now he's 12. I'm like, okay, buddy, we probably need to get you like a robe to wear and, things like that. But like, this is his house. Like that stinks that he's not able to do that. And just a real quick funny story. So again, he was 5 when we started having these essentially young girls. We hired nursing students at first. He called them our guests, our overnight guests. And so I had to warn his kindergarten teacher, like, hey, when Lincoln talks about our overnight guests, Morgan and Sydney and Shelby, like this is what he's talking about. I'm sure she's like, what are they running in their house? It's such a foreign thing for other people to understand and relate to, that like I'm always really upfront with, teachers or other people, or like him having a sleepover. Like I have to warn, those parents, like, hey, just FYI, like we have overnight nursing. So someone's like upstairs all the time. And that's just, something that you typically don't have to talk to other parents or families about. So,
yeah, but also something that is very foreign to them. Like, oh, wow, you have somebody in your home that's not your family. It's, I can only imagine the looks that you get when you do start to engage in that conversation. So let me get real clear on where exactly you guys are at now with what you have in terms of nursing care. Like, when do they come? How often? What are your situations?
So right now we have a day nurse, like 2 days a week. Our shifts are about 7:30 to 4:30. And then we have night nursing completely covered. It's a night shift, 10P to 6A and 11P to 7A on the weekends. And that's even tricky because our son's room is right next to ours. And just to I had this conversation with my husband just a couple weeks ago and not to get too personal, but I said to him, I don't think we realize sometimes the amount of trauma that has been on our marriage relationship. And I think sometimes he and I are both a little bit perfectionist. So it's like, well, if we're not doing this way, or we're not achieving this way, that, our marriage isn't thriving or whatever. And I'm learning that we've had nurses night nurses in our house for the last 16 and a half years. You can't tell me that doesn't affect intimacy. And now as you have teenagers stay up late. Like you said, when we have, like, boys have sleepovers, our daughter has people, or we have family come in, and we've had to learn how to navigate and adjust. And then we also have a respite nurse that she is kind of been our lifesaver. She's been with us. I think she's been with us the longest, about 16 years. Bless her heart. Like, she has grown up with Toby, but she kind of covers, like 32 hours a month. So if there's an evening, like 6 to 9, I'm running a kid to practice, or we have to leave, and Bruce, my husband, and I have to go out for client dinner or something like work related. I am a stay-at-home mom, but we are pretty active in volunteering in church and different things. And our older two boys were basically in travel sports, basketball for many years. So that's kind of when she has covered that nursing. One of the things that I have learned is, and maybe you're going to ask this question, but is how to navigate those different boundaries, how to hire somebody and what that looks like in your house. And I can expand on that in a little bit, but yeah.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned this complexity of the intimacy piece, actually. This is also an issue I think you mentioned with teenage kids. Like, my oldest is a teenager, and so is Levi, but it has created some challenges. And I was talking to Kasey at a conference recently, and I'm going to have a episode actually from, I don't know exactly what she calls herself, but essentially a conversation about intimacy. She's actually a nurse by training, but her area of expertise is in women's pleasure and women's sexuality. And I think it's going to be really great to talk about that. We'll be polling the audience to be like, what do you guys want to talk about? Because this could get juicy. It's kind of also making me nervous. My hands are sweating a little bit already. Okay, back to nursing. Let's talk a little bit about some of those challenge areas. I think it's obvious that you guys have spoken to, like, how the relief has brought you the ability to do things for other parts of your life. But I hear a lot, especially when people are kind of maybe just awarded some hours, the hesitancy and maybe even the story or narratives that come up. I hear the word guilt a lot. And so if you would speak to a little bit about what was your more emotional impact early on and even now. So whatever feels kind of most important to share about having, again, this in-home nursing component of your life.
So right now we are fully staffed, I would say, with nursing and self-directed hours. But just like everyone else, that could change at any moment.
Kasey, clarify what fully staffed mean, actually, if you don't mind. I didn't let you answer, I realize, but thank you.
No, you're just fine. So I think fully staffed really means different things in different seasons of our lives, for sure. But as of right now, how I feel most supported is we have overnight help every single night. So sometimes they come in at 6, sometimes they're coming in at 9, and they leave, somewhere around 8:00 in the morning. So that's every night. And then we also have during the day, because I do work from home, we have help on Monday through Friday, and the timing kind of, changes, but like somewhere around like the 8 to 6 or 9 to 6 hours. And I am able to use, nursing hours and self-directed hours, which are completely different budgets. So I'm able to kind of work that around to wherever we need. So like if Lincoln has a particular, concert at school or something like that, or if we want to, go away for a 24-hour little getaway or something like that, we can do that. And again, that kind of morphed into, sometimes it depends on who you have and if you really like them and if they want more hours, so I have one nurse right now that is just an absolute rock star. Love her, easy to get along with. And she was like, hey, I'm kind of looking for some more hours. Do you have any thoughts? I'm like, yeah. Do you want to work some Saturdays here and there? Like, I have a lot of like organizational projects I'd like to get done, and it would be really nice. I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, but, Stella's needs are very complex. She does not have a trach, but she has a G-tube. She essentially is so low tone that she cannot hold up her own head. She cannot sit up. She's wheelchair bound. Every little thing, everything to being cathed, suppository, feeding, anything, someone else has to help her with. And I found a lot of guilt if I didn't have help and I was trying to work or do something else. And essentially she was just there. No one was playing with her. She might have her eye gaze communication device or something like that. But even that's work, playing with Switch toys is work for her. And so I found that I felt really guilty if I wasn't 100% paying attention to her, but I also had all these other responsibilities. And so it helped me to know that I had someone here and their sole focus is Stella, and to take care of Stella and to play with Stella and to read to her and do those things. So then that way I can kind of set myself away and say, okay, this is my work time and this is when I'm working on this. And so that's helped a lot.
So also kind of going back to your start is like you were in such a state of survival. It seems like when you had the opportunity for nursing care, maybe it was less guilt, but more relief for you. It was like, oh my gosh, we can finally kind of maybe function. And so what would you say are those kind of lingering thoughts or even areas of grief about having this support component of your life?
I do find myself, because we are fully staffed or supported at this point in time, that I start playing this narrative in my head of maybe I should be spending more time with Stella. Like I should be the one that's playing with her. I should be the one that's reading her these books. I should be doing these things during the week. And, we don't know how much time we're going to have with Stella. We know her life expectancy is limited. We just don't know what the future holds. And so am I going to regret that? Am I going to regret not spending more one-on-one time with her? So that is something that I kind of struggle with. But then at the same time, I'm trying to think like, well, if I had a typical child and they were home, I would be sending them to daycare so I could work. And that's what I did with my son. And so is that much different, to have those people here to help support me so then I can, work and do these other things? And what fun is it for her to have a mom that's trying to do 15 things at once versus having someone that's dedicated to her? The overnights is like a blessing and a curse, just like you were talking about. Yeah, I mean, we have 3 sound machines and the bathroom fan going like at all times because it's like, ooh, can they hear the TV show we're watching? Like all these things, because my daughter's room's right next to us as well. And they hang out in like the living room or kitchen area, which is all open. So there's just always that like lingering thought. You can't go out and get yourself a glass of milk or a snack without getting fully dressed and walking outside. And it is your own home. It can be taxing, but at the same time, like, I don't think we could survive without overnight help. Like we wouldn't get any sleep.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing the things that come up in your headspace now, like that I should be the one, or that area of guilt that kind of creeps in. It sounds like you do a pretty effective job of questioning it and saying, well, is that really true? So well done. And let's move to you, Carrie. Same question of kind of looking at what are those things or stories that start to spin in your head that cause you an experience that's undesirable for you?
Yeah. So probably this is more recent than in the beginning. Well, let me go back a little bit. I can remember through the years, probably one of my biggest struggles has just not necessarily been about the nursing per se, but just the need for nursing. So for instance, my husband would call me from work and say, hey, we can get tickets to the Ohio State Buckeye game this weekend. Do we have a nurse? And we wouldn't. And every time we would try to do something together, we have to plan a nurse and a babysitter. So it's because in where we are, the way our nursing is set up, nurses cannot be responsible for other children. And so when they were younger, especially, and our kids were not considered of an age to be home by themselves, quote unquote, even though the nurse is there, it was always a nurse and a babysitter every single time. And I remember just feeling so constrained by the nursing, our son's needs, the fact that most other parents can just pick up on a whim and go do things, or, they can throw their kids in the car and go, and we couldn't. And so that honestly, like I have had to wrestle just with comparison with that. And then more recently, it's just kind of like I mentioned earlier with Toby, helping him to learn how to advocate and for me to listen to him And in the last couple of years, he was just having a really hard struggle with one of the nurses he had, and they weren't necessarily getting along real well. But he can be very black and white. He will tell you like it is. If he thinks that you're doing something wrong, he's going to tell you you're doing it wrong. And he'll say, I am a pro at this. I know what I'm talking about. Don't do it that way. And it was really hard for me to have people say to me, we're leaving your home because of your child's behavior. And all of a sudden, like immediately when I say that, the tears come because I feel like I have made a mistake in my parenting and, all of that. It feels like that narrative of, well, I've messed up somewhere in parenting this child and not, wait, hey, he's had 15 brain surgeries. He has hydrocephalus. These nurses can leave our home and go to other cases and have much more difficult situations than they have in ours. Maybe it's not a good fit. So it's just rewriting that narrative of how do I help him advocate with kindness for himself and also accept that not everyone's going to be a good fit. That was kind of easier in the early days when it was just me making those decisions. And I will say this to anyone listening. I think depending on the nursing agencies that you use or however you are hiring nurses, you have the right to interview that nurse before they come into your home and train and acclimate. Over the years, I developed just this gut instinct of if they didn't take their shoes off when they walked into my house, they were probably not going to last because it means they're not respecting our home. They're not navigating, hey, should I take my shoes off? And another part of that too has been, like you said, Kasey, how they interact with their other kids, because there have been times my older boys tell a story about how one time I was gone. I think my husband and I were out of town and we had a nurse with my mom. My mom was here staying with our kids. They were at the park. And one of my boys, grabbed Toby's wheelchair and they're pushing him around the accessible playground and running with him and treating him like he's a normal kid, right? This nurse steps in, like shoves my kid out of the way and is like, no, you're not going to do that to Toby. And she didn't last very long, but just, there are those situations where if a nurse comes in and they're too comfortable right away and they're trying to take over my home, it's not going to be a good fit. So that's been a challenge too. Just how do you balance conflict and go to that person? When has it gone too far? And you bring in a supervisor. And then it's just that perfectionism in me, that they always got to do it my way. What do you let go? Yeah, just dealing with that mentally and personally.
There's so much there. And actually, I'm going to let a lot of those questions that you just asked, I'm going to have those be a teaser for the part 2 of this conversation. The second part of this conversation is going to lead into a little bit more of you guys sharing your experience with what's worked. Kasey knows I'm all about identity and really knowing who you are in any given role. And clearly, the role of managing in-home care is very different than the typical mother experience. I especially notice this, Carrie, when you're rattling off the schedule and it's almost like you're reporting shift, like in the sense of like that's part of your role as you manage. So anything to wrap up this part of the episode that you didn't get to say or share from this last little conversation before we move into some of the more technical pieces?
I could just throw in there really quickly that one of the other things that I struggle with is that my livelihood is completely responsible by other people sometimes. Like, if I don't have nursing overnight, then now I'm not going to be able to do my job tomorrow, or I'm not going to be able to function. And I really struggled with that on, how if they don't show up or if they're not doing their job, then I can't be in the position to do what I need to do or be the person that I need to be because I'm well rested or, whatever. So it is really hard whenever, someone calls in an hour before their overnight shift where I can't get anyone else in. It completely changes your entire demeanor. My husband and I just deflate. We're like, oh man, it's going to be a rough night, buckle up. Here we go.
Yeah. And I hear this a lot, actually, the experience of these sudden surprises that shift everything and that you really ultimately don't have control of. And whether it's nursing care or something completely different, I think this is one of those through lines through all the different special needs parenting that we deal with constantly. All right. Well, we're going to take a quick pause there and we're going to pick up the conversation next week and we're going to continue where we left off. As I mentioned, we're going to kind of go into some of the more kind of managerial tips and tricks and what's worked and ideas, and really address some of the difficulties of dealing with conflict and having somebody working inside of your own home. See you on the next show. One more thing before we officially wrap up this show. Sometimes when I'm listening to podcasts, I have the experience of wanting more. I'm listening at the very end thinking, I sure wish that episode didn't end. I invite you, if you feel in any way the same way, I invite you to the Special Needs Mom podcast community, which is a free group that I host on Facebook, where we as a community of fellow moms who listen to this podcast and are experiencing life in similar shoes, get to talk to one another, get to share stories, get to actually interact. I hope you'll consider joining. See you over there.